What do you make of these comments from Professor Martin Cormacan?
His comments are interesting, certainly. I mean, I suppose he takes issue with the whole idea of following the science, and he says that the maxim is both misleading and immoral.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you'd have to ask him what he meant by it, but I suppose what he suggested is the science was maybe not as clear at the time as was being portrayed. You know, anybody who questioned the measures that were brought in paid a price. I mean, we should recall that Dr. Martin Feely lost his job with the HSE for saying pretty much some of the things that Professor Cormacan is now, who was a member of COVID at the time, or a member of NEFIT at the time, is now saying. You know, there was a climate of keep your head down, don't speak out at the time. I mean, there was a huge furore over...
but it was unprecedented times, Michael. Isn't that just the nature of that? You almost have to take a firm position and stick to it, otherwise everything will just go completely haywire.
There was a high death rate at the time. There was a very, very high death rate at the end of this year as well. And, you know, I'm not quite in agreement that it was unprecedented. I mean, we have had very high death rates. We have posed huge challenges before, but there was an unprecedented level of anxiety and fear in the air. Certainly that was unprecedented and hopefully will not be repeated at any time in the future. I think we need to learn from this that sometimes some of the measures that appear, while he seems to accept that mask wearing has benefits, he says that the benefits are so slight as not to warrant a legal requirement to wear them.
And he also said, also at ventilation, Michael, that there was limited evidence, or very limited evidence, that better ventilation would have limited the spread of COVID-19, and nor did the evidence support wide open windows resulting in freezing schoolrooms, nursing homes, hospitals and buses.
Yeah, I mean, that's also stated in his report. He does state that. So I suppose what it points to me is the importance of interrogating expertise. I mean, you know, it's easy to present expertise as black and white, expert advice as black and white, when it's often not, and it's often dependent on contingencies. And I think that when decision makers are making decisions, that needs to be interrogated.
And again, it's hindsight, it's retrospect, but should the government perhaps have taken a firmer line in insisting that the schools reopen, despite the opposition that was expressed by various teachers' unions?
I mean, look, there was evidence at the time of the impact that it was going to have on children, in particular children from disadvantaged backgrounds, because, you know, one of the places they can go in our society to be treated equally with other children and receive equal supports is schools. That was taken from them. Children with disabilities suffered a huge amount of anxiety. Their parents suffered a huge amount of anxiety. They were locked into houses without the supports that they need to give them the life they deserve. That was all evident at the time. Dr. Steen said that it's now become apparent that the death rate was far lower than was feared, but that was evident at a very early stage. I mean, I recall studies at a very, very early stage during the first lockdown, towards the end of the first lockdown, that yes, this was serious, yes, this had the impact it would have on people was unpredictable, and it was potentially fatal for people, but it wasn't quite as dangerous as people feared. So, I mean, all of that information was available at a relatively early stage. And of course, lockdowns went on much later than that. Schools were shut much later than that. Children were deprived of services much later than that. Hospitals, vital testing was not made available to people much later than that. It seems to me that the essential criticism that Dr. Cormacan has, and I disagree with much of what's in his report, in particular around the idea of compulsory vaccination, but much of his criticism is how long the restrictions went on for after it became apparent that there was no foundation in science for a lot of what was proposed and accepted without criticism, without analysis by the government at the time.
Thank you very much.